Welcome back, friends, and we welcome you into another video edition of MGO Blue Podcast, In the Trenches. We do want to let you know that what is already out on MGO Blue Podcast, the radio replay of Inside Michigan Football, and my guest, Sharon Moore. In absence for the past 2 weeks, we had Biff, but this time we got Sharon Moore. And we do a deep dive. As sure everyone has been waiting for me to talk to offensive line coach Grant Newsome and Greg Crippen, the center, who had an amazing game against Nebraska. So we do a nice deep dive in there. And I do want to tease, if you go back and you listen to that one, Cripp did mention that throughout his youth football, and I clarify that as everything up until he came to Michigan, in his background is quarterback, running back, wide receiver. We will have him as a guest on In the Trenches so we can have a longer form format to do a deeper dive into his history of playing football. There were some interesting things that he said, but that's on the Inside Michigan Football radio replay. Also already out, Defend the Block with men's basketball freshman, Malik Cordell.
Nailed it.
And yeah, I know there was no.
I know. So to take people behind the fourth wall, I normally provide the pronunciations. I just put his size 7'2", 275.
Yes,
so I didn't actually provide the pronunciation. But great young man, Germany native. I don't know how much he'll play this year necessarily because Michigan's got a lot of bigs inside. But Malik, he's a fun story. Played handball until COVID, and then he had to go outside as opposed to handball being an indoor sport, which I didn't even realize.
Okay.
But. Will Cheddar said it well. We have him on next week. He's like, yeah, Malik's been physical. Maybe a little too physical.
I don't know if that's possible, but we'll see as long as he doesn't foul out. But also, still to come, Thursday's edition of Conquering Heroes. Men's soccer coach Shaka Daly. And I want to let you know that they are 5-0-2. They've got 2 Big Ten wins, and one of them is against what used to be the number 1 team in the country. I don't know how they do rankings in soccer. I don't know if they've come out with a new one or not yet. But
there's a committee.
They put a beat down on Indiana. So that was great to see. Got a big game coming up Friday night.
You didn't hear Ward's now the committee chair of the soccer polling?
Soccer polling. Okay. Not a deep dive into how they do soccer polling, but Friday night, I do want to mention it because it's a maze out. I know it's sold out. You can see it on the Big Ten Network. But if you are going to the game at the U of M soccer stadium, make sure you wear your yellow because it is a maze out against those dirty dogs from East Lansing, the Michigan State Spartans.
And it'll be on Big Ten Network, 6 o'clock for the start. Going to be a fun atmosphere and a big game for a very much ascending Michigan men's soccer program. John, I know it's a bye week. I know you hate bye weeks.
Yes,
but
very much.
You were able to pull some strings. You get an offensive line heavy radio show. Mm-hmm. And then you get a noon kick for Wisconsin next Saturday at the Big House. So you've got some influence around here.
Things are trending in the right direction. We mentioned the ascending team that is the men's soccer team. The way that this season is going, it is an ascending trend. And it's not just because this team is 3-1, 1-0 in the Big Ten. But yes, we did get the information yesterday that we will have a noon kick. Nothing screams Big Ten, old school Big Ten, than a matchup with the Badgers in the Big House at 12 noon.
And then next week we'll go to the Coliseum and play USC.
Yeah, because why not have Big Ten teams on the West Coast?
Absolutely. Can't wait for that one. That's a big game. Obviously, what Michigan just accomplished was a big game to go into the bye week 3-1, as John alluded to, and really to establish we are on In the Trenches, presented by Meijer, and let's talk about the trenches. I want to start, though, with the defensive side. Number 1 on our 7 from 77, John. Michigan with 7 sacks. Dylan Raiola was running for his life. Michigan overwhelmed Nebraska up front. What impressed you most about what you saw? Not just what we discussed back on Saturday's postgame edition, but upon film review.
Well, we've seen now for 2 weeks the Wolf package, as we heard last week, with Jay Sean or Cole Sullivan on the edge, using them as edge rushers. It's been very effective. But what that has led to is you got double teams going against Jay Sean, and you're going to see him, tight end's going to take a shot, Offensive tackles will take the next shot. Running backs are going to come because he is a threat every single time to get to the quarterback. When that happens, you've got to be able to get one-on-one matchups. You're going to have one-on-one matchups, but you got to win those on the opposite side or inside. We've seen Rayshawn Benny win one-on-one matchups. We've seen Derek Moore. We've seen TJ Guy. Like, that's the biggest thing for this defense is now that they're using Jayshawn, and they can use him, and here's still to come, using Jayshawn, moving him around, and putting Cole Sullivan on one edge, and then having, Derek Moore, TJ Guy, all those listed characters. Cam Brandt has been playing out of his mind. Using those guys opposite them and then moving Jayshawn around, I think that's probably the next part or the next step in this Wolf package. But I think the defensive front has been very good. And it's not just the one-on-one matchups. It's the games that they're playing up front. And it's not just keeping guys running straight ahead. We've seen it with Cam Brandt and with Rayshawn Benny running some of those games. We've also seen the linebackers. Jimmy Rolder, I thought, did a tremendous job of picking the left side of Nebraska's offensive line so that Derek Moore, I forget who it was outside. Derek Moore, I believe it was, could come in. He disrupted, but then it was making Raiola move in the pocket to be able to get the sack actually from Jimmy Rolder, who bounced off the pick. So they're doing a great job of changing things up front. It's been very fun to watch, and I'm really intrigued with the next steps of those packages and what they're doing up front.
And this is a great opportunity with all these guys defending as well as they are. Nicknames, we've learned Brandon Hitman Hillman.
Oh.
This week, Sherwin Moore called Jimmy Rolder a hammerhead, which is a great nickname for a linebacker. There's the debate about what superhero Jayshawn Barham is, and frankly, I don't think we should narrow down to one because he's not narrowing down to one position.
Yeah, and I mean, I asked Biff what his favorite superhero was, and he said the Batman.
Yeah.
I should have asked Sharon. Maybe that'll be to come as these guys continue their superhero quest.
That one didn't quite make it as far as the coffee, ice cream, and the Cuban cigar,
Yes,
and the trip to the hospital from Biff.
Yes.
But hey,
Not sure which order, but
ascending.
yeah, well, hopefully. The other trajectory, that's the trip to the hospital.
Number 2 on our 7 from 77. I can refocus here because we've got to talk some offensive line. Now, John, I want to focus on the interior because, Michigan's tackles have remained the same. Evan Link, left side, Andrew Sprague, right side. But inside, what Jake Guarnera has brought into that starting lineup at right guard, Nathan Afobe kicking over to left, and then you talked with Greg Crippen on Monday's radio show. His best game as a Michigan Wolverine. Grant Newsome said, hey, it's the standard now for Greg Crippen. Totality of the offensive line, but in particular, guards and center, what have they done this past Saturday and really to ascend from the start of the year?
Well, they've developed some good chemistry, and that's what you're going to have with those three guys inside. It's kind of that unit within the unit. So you've got to be able to the constant has been Greg Crippen. And Nathan Afobe goes from backing up at right or rotating at right guard all of a sudden to left when Gio goes down. And there were some bumps in the road early on against Oklahoma and Central Michigan. Things weren't perfect, and they still weren't perfect against Nebraska. But Jake Guarnera, who was in competition with Cripp for that center position, all of a sudden he gets thrust in when Brady Norton goes down. Now all of a sudden he's in there. And when you have that competition for the center spot, you're getting the best out of Cripp. You're getting the best out of Guarnera, and they're improving. And it's the techniques that they're improving upon. So now all of a sudden you got those three guys inside. And whether it was the wide zone that they scored on with Justice Haynes to the left, Jordan Marshall to the right, you're seeing these guys really work together in some of those combination blocks. And that's not easy to do when you have different steps that guys are going to be taking, different angles. Nathan Afobe is going to take a different angle than Giovanni El-Hadi is going to do. And then in terms of how they want to receive that double team, all of a sudden, Gio, he may want a guy a little bit more head up, or Nathan may say, I'm going to take a little bit more on the outside, leave a little bit more for Cripp. They've done a really nice job of being able to work together. And it's not just in the run game. When you watch the pass game, and we talked about this with Nebraska, there was a smaller defensive front. So it's not surprising that they were able to get so many yards on the ground. But what was really nice is they knew they weren't going to win one-on-one matchups, so they're going to run a lot of games. It's not easy to pass off games with guys that you were not familiar with. And I thought Kripp did a nice job snapping the ball, taking a step back. It's not an easy thing to do. It's not something that becomes natural. You've got to be able to take that step back. So when you're trying to pass off a game with your guard, you're on that same level. I can bump off shoulder to shoulder. And so I thought they've done a really nice job in that area as well.
I mean, you go back to last week's video-only conversation with Kyle Crooks, the Nebraska play-by-play guy. He said it was going to come down to in the trenches on Saturday, and I think you see why Nebraska was a little bit hesitant about the matchup.
Right, which is why we had him as a guest on
exactly
in the trenches.
Always welcome back. All right, number 3 on our 7 from 77 comes up after we tell our fans about a great opportunity to support a Michigan team and a great Michigan cause.
Oh, that's right, Brian, because this season, Michigan Athletics and Farm Bureau Insurance of Michigan are once again teaming up in the fight to end childhood hunger. On Sunday, October the 12th, join the Michigan women's soccer team at noon as they take on the Indiana Hoosiers. Fans attending the game are encouraged to bring non-perishable food items to be donated to local Ann Arbor food banks. You can learn more about how Farm Bureau Insurance of Michigan is working to end hunger in Michigan. All you have to do is visit michfb.com. In case you're wondering how to spell that, that is michfb.com for more information.
All right, number 3 on our 7 from 77. Michigan culminating 8 days without head coach Sherrone Moore with that win on Saturday at Nebraska. How did Michigan do it? And, John, what does it say about the program that its leader was not there for the entirety of the week preparing for the Big Ten opener? He got them set up. He worked ahead like he talked about before heading out of Schembechler Hall. But still, he wasn't there, and Michigan delivered.
Yeah, I mean, he put the lesson plan together, and Michigan followed it to a T. And they were able to do it because they've got really good coaches, and especially as coordinators. Wink Martindale, it's not his first season. In fact, I don't know, was it 35 or 40 years that he's been coaching on the defensive side of things, and it's been 3 decades worth of experience as a defensive coordinator. Chip Lindsey has been at Auburn. He's been at North Carolina. He's been all over the place, and he's got a wealth of knowledge and experience to build off of in terms of what do we want to do with the game plan, because there were things that they learned in the Central Michigan game, and Sherrone wasn't there to add to the game plan or to take away from some of the things that maybe they weren't operating at a high level. So I think they did a great job of putting together a game plan, obviously that was successful against Nebraska. And we heard from Grant, the true measure of a leader is, are you able to step away and your organization, your team, still be able to perform at a high level? And that was the case. And unfortunately, a lot of the players who were here 2 years ago have already gone through a lot of those things when Jim Harbaugh wasn't there for those final 3 games. Now, he was there during the week, so that's been the big change in this suspension. Hopefully we're done talking about suspensions.
Well, there will be one more next year as of now.
Under appeal. Under appeal. Come on.
Yeah, I know. But Michigan is undefeated in those games, which is crazy. Now, some of those, this was probably the biggest one of them all since 2023.
And it was the first Big Ten game. And you can't underestimate first Big Ten game on the road in an environment that's very similar to what they had in Omaha.
Yep.
So I'm sorry, not Omaha.
Norman.
In Norman. So I thought they did a tremendous job of handling all the ins and outs of the week of preparation, putting together game plans, having the discipline. Now we could talk a little bit more about discipline, some of the penalties, and we'll talk about those in some of the future questions here. But I thought they did a tremendous job of preparing for the game, going out there and executing.
It's an interesting dynamic because you talk about importance of this. Of course, what Michigan did without Jim Harbaugh at Penn State and then at home against Ohio State in 2023. But remember, Jim was able to be in the building every day but Saturday during that run. So when you compare that roster to this one, and the fact that Sharon wasn't there all week to this one, I do think in terms of maybe level of difficulty, Nebraska is not as good as Penn State and Ohio State were that year, but level of difficulty when you bring it all into consideration, it's at least on the same tier, wouldn't you say?
Oh, there's no question. It's on the same tier. And when you think about, not having your coach around, and especially for, like, you get to weeks 9, 10, 11. I'm not going to say it's turnkey, but you have a certain rhythm. You have the players are well versed on preparing for the games, and because I really think because of the way the captains handled things, and it's Max Bredesen, Marlon Klein, Giovanni Ohadi offensively, even Gio not being able to be a part of the game, but be a part of the preparation leading up to it. Both Moores on defense, Rod and Derek, and then obviously Ernie, the way that he played, the way that he prepares, the leader that he is. A lot of credit goes to the captains in regards to keeping the guys focused, going to Lincoln, Nebraska to be able to come away with the win. There are certainly some differences, but a lot of similarities as well.
All right, number 4 on our 7 from 77, the first of 2 bye weeks this season now upon us. Been called improvement week around here. So from a player standpoint, 4 games into the season, on the video-only side, we'll go into John's 4-game grades so far for each unit. But how do the players maximize this week without a game on Saturday?
Well, some of it is just going to be simply recovery. Guys are dinged up 4 games into the season, and whether it's Gio trying to find a way to get back on the field, Zeke Berry defensively trying to get back on the field, there might be some opportunities for them to test things out here in this bye week because they have an extra week to recover. And if things go well, all of a sudden, hey, you start ramping things up for the Wisconsin game. If they don't, you got a couple of more days to recover, and maybe you try it again next week. So some of it's just going to be simply recovery. I think the biggest thing is techniques that they've got to work on. And I've talked about this, during the games. Guards pulling, whether it's pulling for a linebacker, pulling for a defensive end of the line of scrimmage, there needs to be some improvement there. There still needs to be improvement in technique up front. And it's the same thing with defense. Now, every position is going to have a little bit different level of improvement. Secondary, man coverage, that's been a weak area. How do they work on those certain techniques during this week? That's going to be an area where I'd like to see some guys improve. But it's really going to come down to those depth pieces. And, offensive and defensive line depth pieces. D-line, they're very deep. And you're probably not going to see a lot of young guys find a way to get into that, not necessarily a starting unit, but an area where they can contribute. But O-line wise, I mean, in talking to Grant Newsome yesterday, they are one play away from maybe having freshmen have to step in there. So this is going to be a big week. You're going to have some of those competitive drills, some of those young guy drills where 9-on-7s, what are you seeing from a Caden Strayhorn? Because he's a name that Grant threw out yesterday. Yep. Those guys are going to have to get up to game speed. You don't necessarily want to rely on them in week 5. You're hoping you can get a little further down the road, week 8, week 9, maybe next year. But if they're called upon, they got to be ready. And this is one of those weeks where you can really put a lot on those guys and see where they are.
Is it bigger for the younger players than even the veterans in terms of trying to make that jump?
Oh, sure. Yeah. It's huge for the young players because this is an opportunity where we talk about those veteran guys that are going to be, taking a break. Brady Norton, one of those guys that's trying to get back on the field. Who are some of the young interior offensive linemen that are going to get that opportunity? Also, a guy like Blake Frazier. This is a huge week for him because he did miss some of training camp. He didn't have spring ball, didn't have a lot of time last year. So it's just extra reps, in whether it's pass sets, it's run blocking, all of those different things. If he wants to continue to compete for one of those tackle spots, this is a week where he can really show off, this is what I've been working on, these are my improvements. And from Monday through Saturday, there could be great gains that are had this week.
All right, number 5 on our 7 from 77. The team will be focused on getting healthy, improving, getting ready for Wisconsin coming up at noon next Saturday at the Big House. But here on the podcast, among the fan base, even you, John, now that your playing days are unfortunately over, we think.
That nail's not in that coffin yet.
Fair enough.
Never know.
I mean, billable hours. There's a lawsuit in there somewhere.
There is, and who knows what happens with It's the Vanderbilt quarterback.
Diego Pavia,
yeah. You know, we'll see how that goes.
Sure.
You know, there might not be a limit anymore, and I mean, you can make money now, so I don't think being a professional athlete prevents you from.
John will start asking for NIL on the podcast, so it'll be great.
Why not?
I know, absolutely. But I do think we can look at this season maybe a little bit differently now that Michigan got this win. They proved how many lessons they took from Norman and applied in Lincoln to go from a double-digit loss to, it was a 3-point win, but it felt more lopsided. Michigan controlled that game in a lot of ways. So I ask you this, John. Do you look at the rest of the schedule leading up to the game where Michigan does not play Penn State, does not play Oregon, does not play a team like Indiana that proved that, maybe they're this year's Indiana, are the Hoosiers. Do you look at Michigan's potential, the schedule, the opportunity setting up for potentially a spot in the Big Ten championship game, maybe a 10-1 Michigan going into the game against Ohio State?
Yeah, and I mean, you look at the schedule and you say, okay, Wisconsin. And Wisconsin is in a downturn, but it's the trip out to USC. Looking at the lessons learned in Norman and executed in Lincoln, what are some of those lessons that maybe some of these guys that were there in Seattle last year on that trip to Washington, how can they use those lessons to better serve themselves on a coast-to-coast trip playing against USC? And they've got a quarterback that is playing at a high level. Offensively, they're playing at a high level. Defensively, still a lot of questions, but it's another test. And so then you've got games, Purdue, Northwestern, all of those things you should be able to work on and build some confidence in some of those games, because you do have that rivalry game against Michigan State. It's going to be in East Lansing. It's going to be a violent environment. All of those things, trying to find ways to use lessons learned in those games or ones learned in previous seasons to be better prepared for Ohio State coming to town and hopefully getting a chance to go back to Indianapolis for a Big Ten championship game.
I think going into the year, you looked at, obviously those 2 big road games to start in September, but if you were able to get there at least 3-1, that 3-game stretch, Ohio State's always going to define the season at the end of the year. But in October, at USC, home against Washington, at Michigan State. If Michigan's able to run the table in October, the November schedule sets up very nicely for Michigan to be able to get to Ohio State 10-1.
Yeah, and it's really going to be the depth that I'm looking at, because in some of those games, hopefully you take care of business as you should against a Wisconsin or a Purdue or a Northwestern, so that you can get a Blake Frazier in there to play tackle in case something happens to Evan Leak or Andrew Sprague. It's, can you get some of those young guys in there? Because Grant talked about, being able to get Caden Strayhorn in there for a couple of snaps. Now, if you could preserve a red shirt, you'd obviously love to do that. You just don't know what's going to happen.
Remember, the 4-game buffer helps immensely to be able to get snaps but not burn the red shirt.
Right, it does. And so how are they developing that depth? And how are they putting guys in position where you've got the confidence that a game, maybe you've got a 2-touchdown lead. Now all of a sudden, Wink might go a lot heavy man coverage, because that's just something that this secondary needs to continue to work on. We mentioned it in the bye week. That's something I'm hoping that they're developing and continuing to work on, but it's always different at game speed. So if you can get some of those game reps, that's where coaches are looking at, can we get a lead? Can we get comfortable? Can we get some young guys in and develop some depth? But can we also work on some things at game speed that we know we're going to have to be able to do when we face Ohio State or whoever we might face in the Big Ten championship game, and certainly in the college football playoffs.
More of our 7 from 77. We'll talk Big Ten and top 25. But first, John, a word from our friends at Modelo.
Yes, and as soon as I find that read, here it is. Brian, we know that college football season is Modelo season. If you're listening right now, that means it is time for a reward. Reward your full-time fandom with an ice-cold Modelo. Modelo, the official beer sponsor of the college football playoff. Wolverine fans, you deserve a Modelo.
Well, as we transition to number 6 on our 7 from 77, if I'm Illinois, can I find my good game? No, I lose 63-10.
You want to talk about an absolute butt whooping. That was it. I mean, Indiana opened up a can on Illinois. And what's interesting is, and I think I asked you guys this question when we were getting off the plane on the way home from Lincoln. Kirk Cignetti brought his quarterback last year from JMU. And so you saw a handful of those guys came from JMU, but they're gone now. And he goes to the transfer portal, looks over at Cal and says, Fernando Mendoza, we would like you to come to Bloomington. He has performed, what was he, 21 of 23 against Illinois?
Flawless, yeah.
He has been performing at extremely high level. The intensity that team plays with, the discipline that they play with is tremendous. I thought that game would be a little bit of a toss-up. I gave the edge early on in the week to Illinois, and boy, was I wrong. They put a beat down on them.
I mean, no one got that right. 53 points. That's insane. Now, last year Indiana got to the playoff with an 11-1 record. If they go 11-1 with this year's schedule, they will have deserved it. They might be in conversation for a bye, even with the non-conference schedule as it was. And it was 3 bye games at home. Indiana won big. But just the road games that Indiana has, because that was their Big Ten opener at home, this coming week go to Iowa. That's going to be a really fascinating game. Then off a bye week, they go to Autzen, take on Oregon. That is, when we're out west for USC, that is October 11th. Then in November, at Maryland, which, hey, Terps got a big win last week. They're a little bit better than maybe I certainly expected. Then at Penn State and at rival Purdue. Now, they should take care of Maryland and Purdue, but if they go and get 2 of 3 at Iowa, Oregon, and Penn State, and then take care of their home games, I mean, that's a top 5 resume, even with a non-conference schedule that didn't have a pulse.
It is, and the interesting part is let's just go with the assumption that Michigan runs the table, they beat Ohio State at the end of the year, the options in the Big Ten championship game that they could play. Obviously, there's no divisions anymore, so it's not going to be, you wouldn't think it would be in Iowa, it wouldn't be Purdue as they played in the Big Ten championship game, but you could be anywhere from Oregon, Penn State. If you knock off Ohio State, it's probably not going to be them. Indiana is in the mix, and it's kind of crazy to think of how this conference is constructed now and who you might play in a Big Ten championship game.
Also, back on Saturday, USC got to 4-0. They took care of Michigan State in the middle of the night. And now the body clocks completely transition. Noon Eastern, 11 a.m. local in Champaign, 9 a.m. for USC in terms of their body clocks. It's Illinois hosting USC. And, I mean, I know things can ebb and flow and be cyclical, but boy, feels like USC, I didn't look at the line. I'm not sure where it is. It's probably pretty close, but boy, if anything close to that Illinois team that showed up in Bloomington on Saturday shows up in that one, USC's going to get to 5-0.
Well, you would think, especially with the way that Illinois played defense against that Indiana team. Well, the one thing that I don't necessarily know how good USC's defense is. Have they been able to grow up and be a little bit more physical in the Big Ten? If so, yeah, USC might be for real. If not, the one thing that I think you understand about them is Meijer, their quarterback, is going to be able to score a lot of points. And if Illinois can't find something defensively, whether it's applying pressure on a quarterback, it's changing up coverages, that as well might be another blowout just because of Lincoln Riley, his offense, and the fact that they've been able to go to the portal and get Meijer, their quarterback. Yeah,
defining stretch of the schedule coming up for USC. After that Illinois matchup, their next game will be the one against Michigan on October 11th. Then they go to Notre Dame before going to Nebraska following their second bye, so a pretty challenging 4-game stretch there. Also coming up this weekend, really interesting one. It's Ohio State's biggest challenge since week 1 against Texas. They go to Washington. The Huskies blow out their in-state rivals, Washington State, last week. Also, Oregon at Penn State, the whiteout game. Size up what you think of those. Obviously, we won't have the tailgate show coming up on Saturday, so curious your thoughts on who's able to get the win in those two.
Oregon going to Penn State, it's going to be, it's a huge measuring stick for both programs and who they are, what they're going to be. Dante Moore, the quarterback now at Oregon. Drew Allar hasn't jumped off the page in regards to what he's been able to do, but they really haven't played anyone that coming off the bye week. How much have they been able to focus on Oregon and create a game plan for Oregon? Both of those teams obviously coming off bye week. So I think it's going to be a fun environment in Happy Valley. The whiteout, we've been there a number of times for it. It's a great game. And so I still think the talent edge goes to Penn State, but the way that Dan Lanning operates in Eugene, the way that he's been able to coach his guys up, I got to give the edge to Oregon. Even though it's that coast to coast, it's 3 time zones. I don't know how long that lasts or how impactful that's going to continue to be, but I don't think that you can underestimate the job that Dan Lanning does of preparing and developing his guys.
If Oregon wins this game, could you see Penn State becoming the Big Ten's Clemson this year? Because they have not looked awe-inspiring yet.
They haven't. But that's why it's so hard to tell. Is it just that they've been playing to the level of their competition? It's not a great trait to have, but if you play the level of your competition, now all of a sudden you play Oregon, are they able to play up? That's going to be the big question. And I mean, they still have 2 of the best backs in the Big Ten.
Oh, yeah,
coming
they're
into the
loaded.
season, you thought maybe they were going to have the best quarterback. Now, I don't think that's the case anymore, but they really haven't had a chance to go out there and really make a statement.
Yep. This is the opportunity. I will say, Michigan 2023 had a very similar roster returning group and schedule early, and Michigan never looked like this, and obviously they took care of business down the stretch. All right, number 7 on our 7 from 77, some of the other national storyline. Won't go conference by conference anymore because, well, gosh, ACC and Big 12, there's not a whole lot to discuss. Yeah. The one team I do want to mention on the ACC side is Miami. They outlast Florida 26-7, by the way. Gators 1-3 by this week. Nice little reprieve before they host Texas and go to Texas A&M. So 1-5 is right there for the taking for our pals there in Gainesville. Oklahoma, a bit of a controversial win, but hey, if we're playing this out, a 10-2 Michigan is rooting for Oklahoma now. So that was good to see the Sooners get the job done over a previously unbeaten Auburn team. And also, Big 12-wise, Texas Tech pulled away from Utah 34-10. Again, who knows what the Big 12 is going to look like, but, I mean, gosh, Texas Tech and Iowa State seem like those are kind of the top 2, and resumes and impact and all of that. They now both have a pretty impactful win. Thoughts on what you saw last weekend outside of the Big Ten?
The one thing about Florida is they've struggled with DJ Lagway as their quarterback, and I think what he have 5 interceptions the week before. But the one thing that you really haven't been able to question is their defense. And I thought their defense actually did play well against Miami. They just, at some point the dam broke. Miami's able to come away with the win in that one. But when you think about that matchup with Texas, that might actually be a decent matchup. And I don't necessarily know that Texas wins that game because we haven't seen from Arch Manning what we anticipated seeing. He's still developing. That could be a game that they could steal. Texas A&M, I think, is a tougher task. But when you think about what Miami has done to this point, defensively, they have been really hard to score points on. They have been dominant up front. We saw what they did against Notre Dame. And Carson Beck is improving throughout the course of the year. He mentioned it after the game, how much better he feels this year, not being banged up like he was last year at Georgia. And so Miami, not going to say they're all the way back yet because they've also had some coaching faux pas in their past, but they're a team that is starting to creep up everybody's rankings.
Yeah, and as we look ahead this week, Miami's on a bye, and Florida State has an early game. It's Friday night at Virginia, so a potential look-ahead spot there. That's not an easy game. Noles are around a touchdown favorite somewhere in there. But next week, Florida State and Miami, a game that we always know has some juice to it. But boy, Miami's been better than expected. There were pretty high expectations. And Florida State's been way better than expectations. They're looking to stay unbeaten. Also in the SEC, games of note, unbeaten squaring off in Oxford. LSU takes on Ole Miss. LSU a slight underdog in that game. SEC as well. Alabama travels to Georgia. Of course, they played a classic last year in Tuscaloosa as Alabama got kind of a wild win there. And in the Big 12, Iowa State hosts fellow unbeaten Arizona. Other games of note, Notre Dame at Arkansas. Every game from here on out is a must-win for Notre Dame. They beat Purdue last week, and Texas A&M hosts Auburn. Great slate. I think the biggest game of the slate we already talked about with Oregon, Penn State, but there are some doozies elsewhere.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun college football weekend, and we get a chance to sit back, enjoy everything that happens on Saturday, enjoy everything that happens on Sunday. And so, this is that weekend where, I don't know, maybe the wife wants to go to the cider mill.
Sure.
You got to pick and choose, times that you want to do it,
Yeah.
because there are some terrific games.
Sorry, honey, we have 4 flat tires. Whoops.
Hopefully that's all.
All right, transition time. On the audio side, John, a great conversation with linebacker Cole Sullivan. Here on the video side, we are going to get to John's through 4 games grades. But, John, you have the comments pulled up here on your screen, correct?
I do.
I would like you to read this one for me.
Brian Bush keeping real as resident historian stats ninja. Looks like he hasn't been outside with the sun up without an umbrella in a decade. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
My partner is fair-skinned.
Yes.
Let's just say.
Proudly
Fair-skinned,
pale.
yeah. Big fan of sunblock, are you?
SPF 50, John. Got to be careful. Got to be careful.
Don't underestimate the benefits of vitamin D.
Well, got a long way to go. But yeah, that was what I needed you to read.
I appreciate you letting me read.
Yeah,
that
of
one,
course,
yes.
absolutely. Our guy John here. Hello, gents. First time seeing this live, John. Thank you. Thanks to all those. Spelled his name wrong, but otherwise, he's persevering.
He spells it how he spells it.
Just a football fan, go blue. Joel, so grateful for John's analysis of Michigan football. We're grateful to have you here.
Thanks, Joel.
Salute RGS. I was on CBS Live on the day of the game. I had to let those Nebraskans know about Haynes and Barham. Those boys showed out. Boy, Justice Haynes deserves every bit of credit, and he has been very much the 1A. But I just love that we saw the 1A, 1B aspect, because what Jordan Marshall provided, Haynes was kind of that bell cow. Marshall averaged, 13 yards a carry. That was the closest thing we've seen to Corum Edwards since Corum Edwards.
Well, and don't underestimate when the game was on the line and they had to salt the clock away, and Nebraska had 9-10 guys in the box. Who did they hand the ball to? Jordan Marshall, because he's more of that power runner in between the tackles. But he also did a great job when he busted that last run to the outside of staying in bounds. Probably could have taken that one to the house, but said, you know what? We don't need to.
Yep.
Victory formation.
Yep, 100%. Go Blue, Brian. John, I see the offensive line doing a lot of zone blocking. Do you contribute this to their overall improvement?
I do a lot of zone blocking because, yes, they are starting to develop and work together. We're starting to see some guys move some people off the ball. I also mentioned the gap blocking is also, when you have gap blocking, you're going to be pulling guards. And I mentioned on the broadcast, I mentioned it earlier today, it's not a huge asset for these guards right now. Their landmarks aren't where they need to be, and I'm hoping that they can get back to some of those gap blockings, because it's easier to block movement if you're gap blocking. It's basically, hey, this is my gap. I'm going to step there. Whoever shows, I block them. But they've got to improve some of the pull techniques from the guards. I'm
going to let 2 commenters combine to provide the chat's prediction for Oregon at Penn State. Salute RGS, Oregon for show, and David with the rationale. 2 words, James Franklin.
Yes. The only thing I can guarantee in that game is that James Franklin will have the best pom-poms of any cheerleader in that stadium. There's no question.
It's an oldie but a goodie from John Jansen. Yeah. Also, Georgia want that payback game of the day. I kind of think Georgia's going to win that pretty handily as well, but we shall see. Yeah. And I like this from Ryan. Haynes should get Heisman hype. I think the USC game is really important for that, because that is kind of the last potentially big national. If USC can get the job done, can get to that game undefeated, it's certainly not a gimme in Champaign, even though I do think the Trojans will win. You give yourself a big outing there. The stats are going to be there for Haynes. And then, of course, you have a chance to really put yourself and that Heisman candidacy into overdrive with the Ohio State game.
And if there's a year for a non-quarterback to win it, there's really been no quarterback. We could talk about John Mateer. I don't necessarily see him as a Heisman caliber. And we already mentioned the quarterback at Indiana. I know he has gotten some love in that regards. But if there's a year for a non-quarterback, and I'm not sitting here predicting that Justice Haynes is going to win the Heisman Trophy, but you start to get a little bit of love. You got some big games. So let's see what happens in the Ohio State game. You got to have some of those Heisman moments, and that would be a great game to have one in.
And Michigan,
or multiple.
And Michigan doesn't have quite as many high-profile games this year as, say, last year. So you got to take advantage of the opportunities you get. But we'll take some more comments as we go along here, comments, questions. But it's the 4-game mark. Michigan's 3-1. So we wanted to do a little reset with Jon. Put his professor cap on. Jon was, I know that was the potential plan post-football, but you decided to go into broadcasting instead.
Yeah, my professorship hasn't really come through.
Yeah, well, there's always hope. But we want to get your grades unit by unit, and we'll start, I'll allow it, with the offensive line. How would you size up what the offensive line has provided from week 1 to week 4?
So I gave you my grades before we went on, and I've changed this one a little bit. I was originally going to go B-, but I'm going to go B because I think I was being a little bit hard on these guys. There's still a lot of work, a lot of development that needs to be done. There's been some mistakes, and when you look at what they did against Oklahoma, and I'm not going to necessarily grade them up or down when you rush for 380 yards against Central Michigan. You're supposed to do that. But other than the 75-yard run against Oklahoma, if you take that out, it was kind of a pedestrian performance, too much penetration. Now, I do like the growth that I saw from what they had in Norman to what we saw in Lincoln, but there's still some areas early in games. There was a little bit of penetration, things that TFLs that are unnecessary, and it's simply just a matter of technique. So I gave them a B, and part of bumping them up to a B is that 280 yards against Nebraska, but it's also being able to have some interchangeable parts, show some depth. Giovanni's down, Afobe goes over there and plays well, is starting to play better. Brady Norton goes down. Jake Warnera goes in and plays really well. You're starting to get better play out of the tackles. I still want them to be better pass protectors in regards to speed rushes. I think both of them, that's kind of where their limitation is. 5-step drops. When I watch Sprague, that's where he starts to open up his hips a little bit. So if he could stay, one step further square, then we could start talking about better pass protection and 7-step drops. But that goes to, Chip Lindsey, putting these guys in position. If 7-step drops aren't going to be there, then don't put your quarterback back there knowing he's going to get hit. You stay with some of those 5-step drops. It's still, everything in the playbook is still there. He's just a little bit further up in the pocket.
All right, how about hashtag 22 for Heisman, Justice Haynes, and the running backs?
I'm going to go A-, and everybody wants to know, well, why wouldn't you give them an A? There are still some things that doesn't involve running, whether it's pass protection, some areas where I would like them to be in better position, maybe hold their blocks a little bit longer. If you're going to assist either of the tackles, that's where you can really take a step up in terms of these grades. And A-, okay, it's not a bad grade, but they've been very explosive. Early in games, I'd like to see more 4- and 5-yard runs versus some of the 1- and 2-yard runs. It's not all on them. That's, again, it goes to the grades of the offensive line. But some of those areas where you could show just a touch more patience, allow some of those holes to open up a little bit more. I think Justice Haynes, I mentioned it in the broadcast, he does a tremendous job of understanding the flow, setting up a defense, and hitting some of those cutback lanes. Jordan Marshall, that's probably the next step for him.
Yeah, I think it would have probably been maybe a B+ had we not seen the Jordan Marshall game against Nebraska, but totally agree. This one, tight ends, Jon, the expectations were high coming in. They just haven't been able to really get their foot underneath them because of injuries. What's your grade?
Well, and so this is kind of like, where do I put Max Bredesen? And you put him in there, and it instantly raises that grade. But other than that, it's been a little bit incomplete. High hopes for Hogan Hansen, but he's missed a couple of games of injury. We saw game 1 against New Mexico with Marlon Klein. It looked great. We thought, all right, here we got a replacement for Colston Loveland, and then he's been banged up. Zach Marshall has shown some promise, but it's more of an incomplete. But I gave them a B-. I'd still like to see, other than Max, and maybe it's Jalen Hoffman gets more involved in the offense, but to be better blockers at the line of scrimmage.
Wide receivers, this was what I predicted to be one of your lowest ones. What did you give the receivers?
I gave them a C. Everything has been very average. And it's hard to just say average at wide receiver when maybe a quarterback isn't able to stand in the pocket long enough. And so the offensive line grade impacts the receivers, impacts the quarterback. But I still need to see big plays out of the wide receiver group. I think Samaj Morgan has been better this year than he's been.
Yeah.
And Donovan McCauley, he's a guy that I expect more from. We saw that nice catch that he had, the 50-50 grab against Oklahoma. But I think there's more there. And some of it's just the communication. Where was it? It was against Oklahoma, where it felt like there was just not on the same page with Bryce and Donovan on a couple of those routes. Andrew Marsh, I think, is ready to break out. He didn't get a whole lot of run in this last game, but he is right there. And Channing Goodwin has been a nice surprise, but I just need to see more production from the receivers.
I thought it was interesting. There were 2 Samaj drops against Nebraska. Just real time, I thought one was on Samaj and one was on Bryce. But then Jason Avant had a great point. He said, hey, if a quarterback's going to throw it fast, like there was the one throw to Samaj out of the flat that got him to him quick and maybe could have had a smidge off, but Jason said, hey, you got to adjust. If your quarterback's going to throw that way, it's on you to make the catch because the ball was on him. I thought that was interesting perspective.
Yeah, and so how do you prepare for that? Well, when you're catching with Bryce, that's something that you should become more familiar with. If you're going to catch balls without it, hey, turn that jugs machine up and start zipping some balls at close range. That's where you start to adjust and then become second nature.
Yeah, Honest Ryan asking how much do the drops affect your grading of the wide receivers. I think that's a big aspect. Yeah. There hasn't been like a crippling drop that I can remember, right? But they can add up, and you can't let that become too common if there is a late game situation.
Well, I think one of them Samaj would have been a first down. I think it was a third down conversion, and they were better in third downs in Lincoln, but those do affect obviously grades.
Yep, 100%. Quarterbacks.
Quarterback, I'm going to go B-. And I know everybody's going to say, oh my goodness, Bryce, what do you expect? Well, some of it is seen, some of it's unseen. And when you look at some of the adjustments pre-snap, and I mean we haven't had a whole lot of illegal formation, which has been great. And I do put all of that on the quarterback. Yeah, receivers need to know where to line up and all that stuff. But you got to slow things down. And I thought in the game against Nebraska, being able to control the tempo, getting to the line of scrimmage really helped a lot because they got set. All of a sudden, hey, he gets a chance to survey the scene, see what's going on defensively. Maybe a guy goes in motion, then all of a sudden you could see if it's man, if it's zone. All of those things are going to help him, but it's really more of the pre-snap reads. And then some of the things that I want to see, he does a really nice job of throwing the ball on the run, and for the most part, he is accurate. There are some times, the interception against Oklahoma, where I felt like he could have set his feet, got a little more juice on the ball. I don't know if it's a completion. I don't know if it's not an interception, but like some of those situations where if Chip is going to allow you to get out there, if you're not under pressure, you can set your feet and deliver a more accurate ball. So there's just some things, and then some of the read options where Jordan Marshall has been in the back a lot of those times. Instead of handing the ball to him, you get a better read on the edge, and all of a sudden, hey, instead of handing the ball off, Bryce keeps it.
And let's face it, if you talk about the 4 games, 25% of that's Oklahoma. Yeah. And that was a game where a lot of players and a lot of units took a bump in their grade. But I think that's definitely an ascending one. How about defensive line as we flip to the defensive side?
Defensive line, I'm going B+. And I was bordering on A- because I felt like this is a team that has been really stout against the run. When needed, they've been able to apply some pressure. I'd like to see more pressure from some of those D-line spots. Rayshon Benny is really starting to come on, and they're playing good up there. Damon Payne has played good. Trey Pierce had a hell of a game against Nebraska. Where I would, to get to that A, it's really, you mentioned 25% of the grade is Nebraska, those quarterback runs. And I thought there was a little bit of a lack of discipline in that. And then it also goes to some of the edge defenders. And where do I put Jay Sean? You know, he raises this grade, but I kept him at that linebacker position just to make it a little easier on myself. TJ Guy, a little bit more discipline in some of the run reads, in some of his pass rush moves, and it's really just developing that rush plan. I ask these guys a lot, what's your rush plan? How are you developing that rush plan? And I think there could be a next step taken for some of those.
And let's face it, Nebraska and Oklahoma are probably more than 25% of the grade, if we're being honest, right? And that probably impacts it. I don't care what weight you give to any game, the linebackers, this got to be your number one, right?
It is. They're an A. And nobody gets an A+ because nobody's ever played a perfect game. So it's just it's an unattainable grade. You know, if your kicker makes out all the kicks, then maybe he gets an A+, but that hasn't been the case either. So we'll get to that
And
one.
if he misses one, it's F-.
Yes, per that game. But this is, I think, the most talented linebacking group in the country. When you think about Jayshon Barham, the way that they've been able to use him, even early before he was an edge guy or before they used him as an edge guy, he was dominant at that position. Ernie Hausman has been tremendous. I don't know that there's a better open field tackler than Ernest Hausman. And then the emergence of Cole Sullivan. And again, heads up, if you want to hear him, you can hear him on the audio version of this when it comes out tomorrow. But Jimmy Rolder as well, the Hammerhead. Great nickname. But I think all four of those guys have played a tremendous linebacking position, and it opens up so much for Wink to be able to do defensively.
Linebackers, locked and loaded. Corners, probably some room to improve.
Some room for growth, and some of that is Zeke being hurt, not having that experience at that position. But when you look at Jaden Sanders, Elijah Dotson kind of falls into both safety and corner. But those young players, and I can't speak highly enough of Jaden Sanders and the way that he has stepped in and played as a true freshman. I mean, he may be the best corner that they have. And we've seen some growth from Shug. And so, but got to see more consistency from those positions.
So grade?
That was a C+.
C+. All right, how about, we split up, sometimes I'll do just secondary, but I think there's a unique dynamic corners versus safeties because of the youth on that cornerback side versus the safeties where there's some proven guys. Rod Moore's return, how do you size up the safeties?
Safeties I gave a B-, and the reason is really just some immature decisions, and whether it was the penalty by Brandon Hillman, you know, in terms of, and this has nothing to do with playing, but he does play that position, so it all goes into the grade. You can't taunt a sideline. And do I agree with the call? No, I've seen worse in college football, but don't give the officials the opportunity to throw the flag. Mason Curtis, a little bit of an incomplete just because he's been banged up, but I like the path, the angles that Brandon Hillman has taken. Mason Curtis, a little bit better angles early on in the season, but Rod Moore, incomplete only because we saw him for a little bit against Nebraska. It's so great to see him out there, and I don't know how his body handled those situations, how he's recovering from that game. Really happy that we're on a bye week, so he has that extra time to recover, but the more that they can work him in that safety position. But I think Jaden Mangum has played well. TJ Metcalf, I thought has been a nice addition to that. And, you know, again, is he a corner? Is he a nickel? Is he a safety? He's kind of played all those positions. I'll
grade Rod as an A on a curve in game one for his season, just because he got out there, because he played. Remember, his first game in 2023, it was Rutgers, right? The Big Ten opener. He gave up a touchdown. He made a mistake on his third snap. So he came out there. He got through it. He's got the bye week to kind of rest up. Some thoughts here. Honest Ryan saying Jaden Sanders had a really nice open field tackle in the game as well. Absolutely. And another one cut from a different cloth. 27 has been phenomenal as a freshman. I haven't noticed a drop off when they put him in. I think it was
an increase.
I was about to say, I think it's been an increase.
Was an improvement.
Absolutely. No doubt. All right, John, special teams.
Special teams, you know, other than some missed field goals, you know, and what Samaj had a misplay on a punt, maybe a bad decision here and there. But so I went with a B-. And if they play that the way that they did against Nebraska, this grade will take a massive jump. Joe Taylor has been an absolute weapon on special teams. And so there are some things where they've done them extremely well. I think the coverage teams, for the most part, have been good. But it's really, I mean, when you have a chance to make points, you got to make points. And I was shocked at the 2 field goals that Dom missed. Really glad to see the game that he had against Nebraska.
And it didn't sequence to the way where the 50-plus yarder was to win the game in a tied game, but that proved to be the difference, right? That was a big-time kick. We'll see if that bumps Dom's confidence. Lastly, I want to ask about your coaching staff grade. Certainly some unique circumstances. How has the staff handled weeks 1 through 4?
Well, I mean, they've handled it well. I've given them a B. And so part of that is I think they could have opened things up a little sooner against Oklahoma. And maybe some of those plays were called, they just never got to them, or the Brett Venables defense took them out of a lot of things. That's certainly a possibility, but I would have liked to have seen more options for Bryce in that game. And then you start thinking about the end of the first half against Nebraska. That could have been, they should have never been in a Hail Mary situation. You call a timeout a little bit earlier, and you probably force a punt simply because if they don't convert, Matt Rule at that time, being down 7, didn't want to give Michigan good field position, especially with Dom having already hit. I think he had already hit that field goal, or was that in the second half?
So he hit the shorter one first, then he hit the 50
So
plus.
That's where some of those coaching decisions, and I do like the fact that they have opened up the playbook. I do like the fact that, and here's the other thing about the Hail Mary pass. I don't know why TJ Guy is one of the guys that is going from an edge rush, and you're only rushing 3. I get that, but if you're going to drop him into coverage, I think there's others with skill sets better than his in that position. So that's why I went with the B.
Yeah. David saying A for Brian Jean-Marie, the linebacker coach, unquestionably. It's been
good players make really good coaches.
100%. And hey, he's got good players, but he hasn't messed it up, right?
No, he hasn't.
And listen, the thoughts on the Hail Mary, totally agree with this. Yeah, Biff Poggi did a great job. It was a mistake. It was a big one, and Michigan overcame it. Just a football fan, a timeout takes that Hail Mary off the board. Absolutely. It's something that I feel pretty confident Michigan will never misfire on that ever again, because you learned an absolutely brutal lesson from it. So we'll see what happens. Overall, though, I think some positive grades. Certainly, I don't have any that are egregious in any way, shape, or form. Maybe even a little generous.
Could be.
Yeah. You're normally a harsh grader.
Well, and so you also grade in regards to what improvements have you seen.
Totally.
And going to Oklahoma, that's not a great one to grade off of. But then, okay, what did you learn from that? You went out there and you failed the test. What did you learn from that? Did you take any of those lessons and improve on? And I think we can directly see whether it was communication up front, communication offensively. You had a much better game against Nebraska. Now, it's not that defense that you're playing against, but it's all a part of the environment. And you had a lot of obstacles. You invited Nebraska to stay around in that game, but you found a way to respond every single time. Offensive line improved from Oklahoma to Nebraska. The defensive front is much better now than the one that we saw in Oklahoma. So some of those maybe seemed a little bit generous, but it's because they have taken the lessons that they've learned in that failed test and made themselves better.
No doubt. David puts it well. Grow from a loss, 100%. All right, John mentioned it. Cole Sullivan is John's guest on In the Trenches on the audio side Wednesday. Cole, I'll tell you, words per answer isn't a high rate, but I think what he says is pretty impactful.
Yeah.
And he is a football guy, looks the part, sounds the part, and plays the part. It's a great conversation.
Yeah, and he's a lot of fun to watch. And he's a lot of fun to watch as he's developed. Think about the fact that in that first game against New Mexico, we saw the interception, we saw the sack, but those were all in quote-unquote garbage time. Now all of a sudden you do that. And I think he's a great case study for a lot of young players. You go out there and show in those moments that you can make plays. Now all of a sudden against Oklahoma, we saw a little bit more. Against Central Michigan, we saw a little bit more. Against Nebraska, we saw a lot more. So it was really good to see him progress. And he is an impactful player, but I think his impact, the best ones, are yet to come.
Yeah. He talks on the gridiron. That's a great comment. Yeah. Speaking of talking on the gridiron, before we go, how about the Lions last night? Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
And it was so funny because I was texting with a few buddies, and I said, "Yeah, I haven't seen Aiden Hutchinson. Hadn't heard his name very much." And then
Fumble.
boom, right there, one of 7 sacks as well. Man, what a stud!
Yeah.
And I wonder if he's even feeling like that 100% right now.
I don't know, and it may just be a matter of trusting his leg in some of those situations. I don't know that we haven't seen him play like he did early in the season last year. I think it's all part of the process of coming back from an injury like that. But those 2 offensive guards, they took a beating, and Graham Glasgow took a beating after the trip to Green Bay.
You mean the season didn't end in week 1?
It did not end.
No way.
They were allowed to get better.
They were not mathematically eliminated.
And the season is not over
it's not.
either after they've only played 3 games.
100%.
But
Ravens, we were talking about this kind of among the show here earlier. The Ravens always seem to have a weird loss early. This one was earned, though. This wasn't like the Raiders last year going there. But yeah, big win.
Yeah, big monster win, and now you got, what is it, the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah.
You've got Cincinnati. That doesn't seem quite as imposing. They got beat down this past week.
The nail biter.
A trip to Arrowhead, which doesn't seem quite as imposing either. Tampa coming to Ford Field before the bye week. So, there's a lot of excitement for Detroit fans and Michigan fans.
And honest, Ryan, love the 10-minute, 38-second drive with 18 plays, baby. Michigan had a similar one.
Yeah.
Grinding out clock. Nothing better. All right, that'll do it for this week. We're back next week. We will get ready for the matchup, Michigan and Wisconsin. Also, our friend Michael Cohen, national college football writer for Fox Sports, will stop by to break down what was and what will be, and what then will be a great weekend of college football. Can't wait to bring it to you. Thanks to everybody who joined in the chat, active. Thanks to Professor Jansen for joining us.
Yeah, I might not be a professor here at Michigan, but if I went to some lesser schools like those in Columbus or East Lansing, hey, I might be their #1 lead.
On that note, thanks so much for watching.